I had spent years exploring the untamed wilderness, but nothing in my past could have truly readied me for the ordeal that nearly ended my life. It was early March. Dense snowpack weighed down the trees, and the temperature often plunged deep below freezing each night. My journey began across provincial borders with a backcountry skiing expedition that led my companions and me through remote areas of British Columbia. For over a week, we trekked across vast snowfields, learned how to carve shelters in drifts so deep that the sky was nothing but a tiny blue bowl overhead, and practiced the basics of survival under relentless conditions. Even after such grueling adventures, skis strapped tight, wind battering our faces, I discovered there was one technique I knew next to nothing about: ice climbing. I had scaled rock walls and clambered around on ropes before. Lugging a backpack up daunting inclines had been part of my daily existence when I was younger. Still, I was a newcomer where sheer frozen cliffs were concerned. When a friend, Tim, who was a certified lead climber, asked if I wanted to attempt a single day of vertical ascent on a popular icefall in the Canadian Rockies, I agreed. Some might call it bravery. Perhaps it was more a mix of curiosity and overconfidence. Our trek into the Rockies started in the early dawn. 10 feet of snow gleamed under a pale sky, dusted with swirling flurries that caught the light. When we reached the wall of ice, we saw others there too, linking their ropes together, knocking chisels against the blocky surface. I could feel the tension in the air, an undercurrent of both adrenaline and respect for the mountain's severity. I noticed right away that something was off with my gear. In my right hand, I gripped a short-handled hammer fitted with a wrist loop. It was meant for chipping, for quick placements of screws and short traverses. Meanwhile, my left hand clutched a technical ice axe with a more secure strap, suited for longer holds and the possibility of regenerative rest if you could hang correctly. I recognized this imbalance but pressed on. We were only planning a brief climb. I told myself it would be fine. Our ordeal began on sun-kissed ice, but with each hour the day advanced. My arms quickly groaned under the force needed to swing that hammer, burying picks into dense layers of ice. Every time I tried to rest, the memory of past climbs flickered through my mind. Thousands of vertical feet on rock faces, weeks and months in the mountains. But this felt entirely different. Turned out that ice demanded a unique technique, one that drained energy faster than I ever imagined. By the time we were a few hundred feet from the top, it became painfully obvious we'd been going much slower than the other groups. My forearms cramped from maintaining a death grip on the hammer. Each time I swung it, shockwaves rippled through my palms, making my fingers ache. Eventually, Tim and I reached a narrow ledge just as the final rays of sunlight drained from the sky. Below, the other climbing teams finished their descents and started packing for the exit. There were cheerful waves and distant calls, but as they disappeared into the fading light, the heavy hush of reality set in. Night swallowed the cliff. Temperatures abruptly dove. This was the pivotal moment when the cold began to exact its price. Our layers, though insulated, were no match for the falling wind chill. My body shuddered uncontrollably, each tremor more violent than the last. My teeth clattered, even as I clenched my jaw. Tim, equally chilled, scanned the darkness. We knew extraction wasn't simple here. We'd have to rappel down multiple pitches, each a fresh chance for error. From that vantage, I heard the hush of the river below, a constant distant rush. The snow-laden peaks shimmered in starlight. I kept glancing at them, half hypnotized by their beauty, but that sense of wonder quickly collided with a rising panic. How-to guides for safe winter climbing often stress descending before nightfall or ensuring your gear is perfect. Our situation violated all those best practices in an avalanche of errors. We began to rappel. The rock felt as if it might slice through my gloves each time I steadied against it. Darkness magnified every hazard. I remember trying to stay focused, using a step-by-step mental tutorial in my head. Anchor, check knot, lower, watch your footing. Yet with the temperature plummeting, mental clarity was ebbing just as fast. Hypothermia's stealthy approach turned thinking into a thick, sluggish swirl. Somewhere during these descents, the park warden had apparently realized we were still out there and began searching. We glimpsed lights far off, felt a brush of hope. Unfortunately, the terrain was too treacherous for a quick rescue, and the warden had to turn back. We pressed on, illusions of immediate help dulled by the biting, relentless weather. By the time we reached another ledge, around half the total distance back to ground level, we faced utter exhaustion. A swirl of half-lucid thoughts spun in my mind. I had read about viral hacks for staying warm in dire conditions, like stuffing snow in your jacket to maintain an insulating layer, or performing intense exercise to encourage circulation. In reality, none of these were easy methods under those circumstances. We tried to do jumping jacks, stamping our feet against the glacier's surface, but the final reserves of my energy slipped through my fingers. Tim and I realized we had one last rappel, about 150 feet above safety. The anchor here was embedded into the rock, specifically designed for training. Red flags or not, this was the final gateway between us and stable ground. Tim, being the more experienced climber, went first, working with the rope in what felt like a ritual dance against the yawning darkness. Then came my turn, and I inherited the job of retrieving the rope. I wound it through the ring, anchored securely, feeling that spike of relief at having a stable platform beneath my boots. However, when I yanked down on the rope to pull it through, it jammed irretrievably somewhere above, hidden in the dark gullies. I tugged multiple times. Each attempt only tightened the snag. The rope didn't budge, like it was pinned under a boulder or locked in a crooked crack. It's difficult to convey how quickly my morale dissolved. Waves of exhaustion and cold hammered at my body. The next realization came with horrifying clarity. I might actually die here, mere moments from the ground. My mind turned to my parents. Memories of how my sister's disappearance had splintered our family unity sprang up, unbidden. The ache of it practically glowed in the darkness. I saw my parents' faces contorted in grief. An old heartbreak only turned deeper by a second loss if I succumbed. An odd wave of relief washed over me. Some part of me released the urgency of self-preservation, as if that was the only way to remain coherent. My skin felt on fire with heat, an enormous contradiction to the brutal environment. Ignoring reason, I unzipped my jacket, seeking relief from an imagined fever. Tim scolded me, but I no longer cared. The best practices for dealing with hypothermia say you must insulate yourself, keep your core warm, never shed layers. I was too delirious to accept that logic. Each time fatigue overcame me, my helmet would clunk against the icy wall, snapping me back into a semblance of consciousness. Some cycle of blacking out, then re-emerging, repeated far too many times to count. Eventually, something gave way inside me, a final slip from life into a place of utter stillness. I realized with a start that the shuddering cold had vanished. Pain no longer riddled my body. Instead, a boundless darkness surrounded me, soothing and strangely peaceful. Far in the distance, I detected a glow, a tiny spark of brilliance set against a cosmic expanse. In an instant, it expanded, a swirling entity radiating intelligence as it extended across vast distances in a fraction of a moment. There was no voice, yet I felt it speak, as clearly as if someone had pressed words directly into my mind. It was summoning me. Before I could formulate a protest, it seized me with an irresistible force, as though I weighed nothing. I tried briefly to fight back, but that boundary between me and it dissolved. Within this glowing presence, I sensed not fear, but boundless comfort. A reservoir of profound knowledge coursed through me, as though the mysteries of existence were being shared all at once. I recognized an ancient familiarity, as if I had known this presence forever, though I had no recollection of learning about it in my mortal life. At some point, I became aware that I was no longer bound to my physical body. It felt like I was an orb of consciousness, akin to the entity that had captured me, yet smaller. There was no physical weight, no hands or feet to weigh me down. I hovered in a plane devoid of usual constraints. Then, from an immeasurable distance, a second light burst forth, intensifying until it surrounded me in a cascade of pure radiance. This current was layered with countless hues, as if infinite galaxies poured through it. It enveloped me, inviting me deeper into a space beyond time. Bathed in this brilliance, I felt everything about my life laid bare. The total tapestry of my joys and sorrows, my relationships, the harm I had done, the kindness I had given, I've seen tutorials describing a life review phenomenon in some near-death experiences, but the reality was beyond anything I had mentally rehearsed. It wasn't condemnation. Rather, it was an unveiling of who I was in a luminous clarity that allowed no pretense. I sensed how every unkind action had rippled, feeling those consequences in a direct empathetic surge. The anguish I had caused others hit me from within their viewpoints. Yet this unstoppable love, emanating from the boundless light, cradled me as I confronted these truths. It was an unimaginable forgiveness, an eternal reassurance that no flaw was irredeemable. If I had watched a step-by-step tutorial on compassion, it could never have approached this absolute mercy. The entire reality of my being was known, and still, I was embraced. I might have merged entirely with that presence, dissolving into unity, and I wanted to, passionately. But a memory of my parents and their heartbreak cut through. I opened up that longing to the light, which enveloped me in renewed compassion. Words that weren't words echoed. My time in mortal form was done. I was being welcomed into a realm far greater than I'd ever dreamed possible. Yet, I recognized an inner conflict, the wish to spare my parents from more sorrow. Immediately, I felt a swift movement through the infinite, a journey that spanned eons yet occurred effortlessly. I glimpsed entire constellations blossoming, swirling and fading. A sense of traveling to the edges of reality overcame me, as the swirling intricacy of galaxies revealed itself like an elaborate tapestry. Suddenly, I saw Earth from an unfathomable vantage point. I watched billions of people trudging through the day or drifting in sleep. The entire planet became transparent, revealing to me a single glowing spark at the deepest level of every living person. A shimmer they often seemed unaware of in their daily struggles. The radiant presence told me these sparks were part of the same infinite love that now cradled me, demonstrating how all was inextricably connected. Then, the perspective zoomed out to a cosmic scale. This presence gave me a sweeping view of the entire universe, a kaleidoscope of swirling galaxies, black holes, luminous nebulae, and beyond, into what I could only interpret as alternate dimensions or parallel universes. Each place brimmed with a unique kind of life, shaped by the same creative force, the same unstoppable love. I felt informed that no matter where consciousness emerges, it forever remains a facet of the same radiant source. Still, I was anchored to the memory of my parents, seeing the forked path of their future. One timeline if I never came back, one if I returned. I discerned that ultimately, each path led them to a place of peace, though one route appeared more agonizing than the other. I also recognized that free will was fundamental. I had permission to stay, or the right to leave. In a flash of self-awareness, I understood that staying meant fully merging with this luminous home, drifting beyond all boundaries. Leaving meant reclaiming human frailty and continuing mortal existence with its joys and perils. I opted to go back. My desire to spare my parents that extra wound, after everything they had endured, weighed heavily on me. A silent hush answered my decision, then the presence guided me again. With blinding speed, I was propelled toward a corridor lined with countless swirling gateways, each one a possible entry point for a life. In the center of these passages roiled a beam of brilliance, a concentrated essence of creative power. I was instructed, wordlessly, to choose. My conscious being rushed forward. I wanted an existence balanced enough to highlight life's fragility, so that any light shining through me would be recognized as not mine alone, but an echo of the presence. A wave of acceptance enfolded me. Then I felt myself condense, heavier, more defined. The infinite realm faded. With a sudden jolt, I was flung back into awareness of my battered physical form. Searing, incomprehensible discomfort replaced that airy, blissful suspension. My hands were ice-burned, numb lumps. My toes likewise held no sensation. Voices hammered at my ears. Tim's frantic shouts cut through the hazy veil. A rescue volunteer was with him, also calling. My eyes fluttered open to realize we had been discovered. My memories for the next while seemed like a disjointed collage of rescue procedures. Being given water, strapped into a harness, lowered to the valley floor, whisked away in a blur of headlights and hushed instructions. When I next truly emerged from a confused twilight, I was safe, with heated blankets piled on me, my face still stinging from the day's final adversity. Recovery was not instantaneous. My extremities had suffered serious frostbite, my mind quaked with the aftershock of trauma, and my heart reeled from that cosmic encounter. Hospital staff gave me expert tips for eventual rehabilitation, like daily physical therapy sessions, specialized rewarming treatments, a step-by-step regimen that felt archaic compared to the visions I had just seen. Yet I followed them because I yearned to walk again without crippling pain. In the ensuing months, I couldn't easily talk about what I had witnessed beyond the threshold of life. My sincerity became tangled with an awareness of how unbelievable it sounded. People wanted a tutorial on the near-death phenomenon. They'd say, "Describe it in a linear, how-to style, so we can follow your steps." But part of what happened transcended words. No ultimate guide can fully instruct or replicate the raw, transcendental dimension I glimpsed. Eventually, I found ways to share bits and pieces. Some individuals labeled them illusions caused by extreme cold and oxygen deprivation. Others were enthralled, peppering me with questions about mystical states and whether there was a top 10 strategies piece of advice to replicate such a peaceful realm in daily meditation. I sought humility in my answers. The only truth I could stand by was that I had encountered genuine love, bigger than galaxies. In the years that followed, I devoted myself to analyzing spiritual traditions, from ancient texts to the latest trends in philosophical dialogues, searching for parallels to my own experience. More than once, I considered the possibility that this boundless compassion I had encountered might be accessible in simpler forms right here, in the midst of day-to-day existence. If there was a behind-the-scenes secret of reality, it seemed to be that love is woven into everything, even though we strain to see it. I decided I would try integrating these insights into practical living. Instead of climbing every storm-lashed peak, I formed relationships more deeply, listened to others more carefully, and tried to show kindness even when it felt inconvenient. I experimented with easy methods like pausing before a harsh reply or offering help in small ways, hoping the love I glimpsed could shine through. Many of the biggest spiritual influences in my life shared these same expert tips: love, empathy, and presence in each moment. Sometimes I still recall my final visions beyond those cosmic gates. I'll sense my consciousness shifting softly back to that moment of weightless intensity, with lights flickering in infinite brilliance, and an unconditional acceptance that erased guilt or shame. Then I remember the reason I returned. Some days the human condition weighs on me, with all its tragedies, injustices, and heartbreak. But a gentle whisper remains. The ultimate essence is wholeness and connection, far more vast than our daily illusions of separateness. In retelling this saga, I often focus on the tangible aspects: chapped skin, a jammed rope, the synergy of survival tactics. But beneath that is the intangible metamorphosis that overshadowed the physical risk. My near-fatal climb transformed me from the inside. While step-by-step tutorials on ice climbing are crucial for safety, and best practices ensure you plan your routes, pack the right equipment, or stay within your experience level, there's also an underlying journey in every mortal life. In that journey, the truest anchor isn't forged from metal or epoxy. It's any act of compassion, any risk taken on behalf of love. Reflecting on that night, I sometimes wonder whether I would have chosen differently if I'd known the cost. That cost, both physical and psychological, was monumental. Yet, when I weigh it against the immeasurable gift of insight, I always find that I have no regrets. The freeze, the hallucination or awakening, whatever the label, shifted me forever. Trending now might be a phrase repeated on modern platforms to catch attention, but authenticity extends beyond the surface of social media phrases. It's about living insight and forging genuine bonds, two tasks that remain infinitely more formidable than any ice ascents I've encountered. For climbers seeking a more grounded approach, there are top 10 strategies to avoid catastrophes. Training thoroughly, never climbing beyond your skill set, respecting changing weather, ensuring proper gear, knowing advanced rope techniques, keeping warm layers handy, staying hydrated, evaluating fatigue in teammates, maintaining timely communication, and linking up with rescue support if needed. These are best practices that can save lives, but no how-to manual is a fail-safe. Accidents still happen, and because mountains are unpredictable, and each climber's physical condition can shift in an instant. It's not just the extremes of mountaineering that carry these lessons. Life itself is always uncertain. In Viral Hacks for Personal Growth, you might find advice to practice gratitude daily, recognize the brevity of existence, or maintain open-mindedness. I humbly believe integrating these ideas is more vital than any single adrenaline rush or mountaintop selfie. Confronting one's mortality can spark a renewed sense of reverence for just being alive, and a deeper commitment to extending kindness whenever possible. I used to believe that my body, chiseling its way up towering ice, was the ultimate testament of my strength. Now, I see that vulnerability is better proof of our shared human nature. Mortality unites us. We share heartbreak, we share hope, we share a longing for meaning. If I gleaned anything from that luminous realm, it's that compassion might be the greatest creative force of all. With it, we can become instruments of healing. Without it, we remain trapped in cycles of fear and isolation. Whoever reads or hears about my experience might interpret it differently, some through religious frameworks, others from a strictly rational viewpoint. Either perspective can hold truth. That infinite presence displays itself in countless ways, some we might call supernatural, some anchored in the intricacies of the brain. The real pivot is how we choose to respond in our daily lives. Let the existence of that unshakable love be an invitation to live more authentically. Whether that means practicing quiet acts of generosity or forging a path of mindful awareness, the shape it takes is personal. In certain moments, I recall the starlight shimmering across the frozen peaks, the hush of the Saskatchewan River far below, the possibility that every moment could be the last. That final rappel, jammed rope, and utter exposure taught me an epic lesson in humility. Then the intangible cosmic experience taught me about a boundless realm beyond our usual senses. Had I not survived, I would never have told this story, yet some essence within me would have continued. I hope that those who listen or read these words can sense a fraction of the peace and awe fluttering through me when I think of that cosmic invitation. It strips away the fear of dying. It doesn't eliminate the pain of losing loved ones or witnessing suffering, but it reframes those sorrows inside a cosmic tapestry where love ultimately prevails. I can still see the multicolored brilliance swirling, reminding me of the northern lights multiplied 1,000-fold. That brilliance was alive, an intelligence far surpassing anything I've known. It was a behind-the-scenes glimpse of the ultimate foundation, supporting not just our planet, but countless worlds we have yet to imagine. In that single unearthly moment, I was both minuscule and infinite, embraced by an unconditional acceptance that overshadowed every regret I carried. Let me address briefly the aftermath. My parents eventually found out every detail. They were both agonized and relieved in equal measure. Grief had carved a hole in their lives years earlier when my sister vanished. Seeing me return from the brink, battered but alive, gave them a chance to reclaim some equilibrium. We still don't have answers about my sister. Even so, my parents told me that my survival and the spiritual perspective I brought back changed their outlook on life. No tutorial or best practices can teach that kind of renewal. It comes only when hearts are laid bare through love and compassion. In these pages of memory, one image stands out. The first time I was able to walk outside again, months after the accident. The sun felt unreasonably warm on my face, nearly shocking after so much iciness. I inhaled the crisp air, grateful for even the smallest detail, a bird singing, the distant hum of traffic. Everything felt bright, unbelievably real. That sense of aliveness is something we so often neglect in our daily schedules, missing the miracle in each humble moment. My advice, if I dare call it that, is to remember that we exist in a remarkable and mysterious world. The daily routines, your top 10 strategies for productivity, or those latest trends for health, are all valid pursuits. But at least once a day, perhaps at sunrise or some hushed moment before bed, let the rush subside. Feel your heart pumping. Sense the bedrock of existence. In that sliver of quiet, you might catch an echo of the love that enveloped me on that mountainside. It's not necessary to teeter on the brink of death to discover you're part of something immensely larger. Just acknowledging that possibility may be enough for transformation. If step-by-step expert tips help, then create a short routine of mindfulness, an easy method to unplug from distractions. Practice compassion in your relationships. Offer a friendly smile to someone who seems down. These things may look small, but they resonate. They lighten the burdens strewn across our civilization. Returning to the subject of the climb itself, many helpful resources exist for novices or intermediate enthusiasts wanting to cultivate safer travels in the mountains, a veritable ultimate guide to ice climbing. They explain how to read glaciers, gauge avalanche risk, tie knots with reliability, and navigate rapidly changing weather. My story might serve as a cautionary tale. Always weigh your capabilities against the environment's demands. If you're unprepared or your gear is incomplete, it can escalate from inconvenience to peril in the blink of an eye. But in parallel with that external readiness, attend to your inner world. Fear is natural, but so is wonder. Let the mountains awaken your sense of reverence rather than pushing you blindly into proving yourself. Seek the how-to mastery of technique, certainly, but hold on to wonder as well. Just because something is physically demanding doesn't mean it has to overshadow the intangible magic of the places we explore. To many, the extraordinary nature of my near-death revelation will sound unimaginable or possibly contrived. Yet this retelling is the best articulation I can offer. In the years that rolled on, I found my experience matched accounts from others who have hovered in that threshold. Each person's story differs in detail, but converges in a tapestry of peace and acceptance. Perhaps this is a universal dimension glimpsed in special circumstances, or maybe it's simply a hidden wellspring in the human mind, unlocked during crises. My personal belief is that it was real, the greatest measure of truth I've encountered. When day-to-day stress wells up, I try to revisit that recollection, an immeasurable light, brimming with love that needs no boundary to exist. I remember how effortlessly it seemed to dissolve all illusions. That vantage hasn't left me. I can see the center of existence as something so inherently compassionate that pain, while formidable, can't erase love's ultimate presence. As for Tim, we kept a profound bond, though life events eventually pulled us into different regions and occupations. We never forgot how we clung to that icy ridge. Even if we rarely talk about the spiritual dimension, we both carry the gravity of that night. He told me once, long after, that seeing me slip out of consciousness was the single most terrifying thing he'd ever witnessed. He'd never realized a person could look so distant while still breathing. In a way, he too confronted that boundary between life and death, albeit from his vantage, helplessly watching me fade. Sometimes people ask if I'd climb ice again. Strangely, the answer is yes, though with far better precautions, a deeper respect, and a healthy dose of regard for timing. I'm not out to test fate. The mountains remain a place I love, but I know now that my real anchor isn't the rope or the harness. It's the unseen force connecting us all. I realize I've reached a point in this story that begs closure. Yet in truth, the journey never really ends. Day by day, we step forward in our fragile bodies, hearts pulsing with hope and fear. We move between moments of sorrow, joy, confusion, and love. The tapestry is immeasurable. My wish for you, reading or listening, is that you recognize how precious this all is, and how wondrously open the possibility for transformation remains. If you ever stand at the brink, whether that's a literal precipice or a metaphorical one, know that an immense love waits just outside the frame. You might find it in a friend's unexpected kindness, or in the hush of a hospital room at midnight, or as in my case, in the hush of a frozen cliff in the middle of nowhere. However it emerges, it changes everything. For all the complexities of this human story, the core takeaway is painfully simple. Love remains. It holds us, whether we see it or not, whether we name it or not. My final gratitude is for the gift of coming back to live that fundamental truth in daily life. And as you carry my story forward, may it inspire you to open your own heart, to see beauty in the ordinary, and to share even a fraction of that inexhaustible love with the fragile world around you.